IVM.
This is Storytellers and Storysellers. You're listening to Vineet Kanabar on the IVM Podcast Network. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the last few episodes of the show. I've really enjoyed talking to the guests on here and bringing you what I think are the most important conversations in the space of entertainment and business. If you haven't yet, check out some of the recent episodes. I talked to Barkha Singh about Instagram, to Sony's Amog Dusar about multi-screen content, and to What Is This Behavior, Pooja Mishra, about owning her meme. If you like the episodes or have some feedback or want to recommend someone for a chat on this show, hit me up at Ashcharya on Twitter or Instagram, or Vineet Kanabar at Gmail for email. Coming up in the next few episodes, I'll talk gaming, the IPL and sports, and the movies. But first, food and Gauri Devidayal. Gauri is partner at Food Matters and one half of the duo behind legendary Bombay restaurants like The Table and Iktara. On this episode, we'll talk about Gauri's entrepreneurial journey, about eating well in the lockdown, and about how restaurants are plotting their comeback. Strap in for a great chat. And hey, you're awesome. Today, we're talking to partner at Food Matters and the woman behind restaurants like The Table, Gauri Devidayal. Now, every episode we talk to you about different aspects of entertainment. You've got some of the most talented people working in entertainment today come to this podcast and share their thoughts. I thought let's expand the gamut of entertainment that the gamut of what we consider entertainment on this show and talk about restaurants, going out and eating out. Well, it's a big part of what I consider entertainment outside of lounging on my sofa and consuming Netflix, and to talk more and more about how the world is waking up to going out. Gauri, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks.
Before we talk to you about entertainment and nightlife and food and restaurants, you're also a podcaster.
Yes, I have a new show launching on the 2nd of September called This Round Is On Me, which I'm super excited about. But I have to say, that's actually our second show. There's a little bit of a story behind this. I was invited to be on Cyrus's show, of course. It's almost like rites of passage.
Absolutely.
Before you can become a podcaster, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, he kept me waiting. And so while I was sitting around in Kavita's office bugging her, met her for the first time and got chatting about what I was up to. And I think she was probably one of the first people I revealed that we were working on a new restaurant on. And just got talking about how it's one of the most grueling processes to be going through and, all of that. And of course, Kavita being Kavita, she was like, why don't you do a podcast on this?
That's stock question, that is.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. That's her view. So, and that's how we launched a show called The Colaba Cartel back in 2018. It was a limited series show on with 10 episodes about what goes into the making of a restaurant in Bombay. Super interesting, really fun. Did it with my partners in the business and Amit, and we had a few bonus episodes considering this is an ever evolving industry. And then we sort of, I think I caught the bug of podcasting after that. And, she's been after me to do another show. And, I've been thinking about it. Obvious sort of subject was F&B.
You should totally do it.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you are. And the show title sounds very intriguing. This Round's On Me. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's not only about drinks.
Shocks.
Yeah, I know. Well, at least I got your attention, right? It's actually, the real trigger that got me sort of, to get down and actually do it was all the time I had during lockdown. And it sort of stemmed from this uncertainty of, not knowing what sort of lay ahead of us, and also trying to figure out what we were going to do, with our business. And, I was listening to literally everyone under the sun, talking about what they were going through and what they were thinking. And that's kind of what sort of fueled the idea of this show, which is that we're essentially talking to, veterans, thought leaders in different industries to try and learn from them, really, but also to try and get a bit of a sort of do a little bit of crystal balling about where we think things are going. And So there is a lot of F&B. I mean, that's my natural inclination and, area of interest. But we're literally talking, to everyone from Siddharth Roy Kapoor to Mr. Harsh Mariwala to Raul D'Acuna, about advertising and brand building. And it's super interesting. It's something that I'm enjoying more than my work right now. So I'm really excited about it.
It's coming through from your voice when you talk about it. Let me tell you that. And that's super exciting. I think in my 30-odd episode run so far on the show, and I started this because I'm a certified bona fide workaholic. If I don't take time off to talk to smart people, I will become AI who just does things, right? So I started doing it because of that. And I hear so many of the same reasons why we're doing this, right? Having a conversation with smart people, getting outside your own head for a while, because obviously you're constantly thinking of your decisions and your things that you need to do. But getting out of that, and at the same time, having a conversation for thousands of people at least, if not millions so far.
Yeah, I think that, it's a lot to ask people to give that sort of 45 minutes or an hour of their, week to you. And there is a lot of, interesting thoughts out there. And, it's, and I think also as a woman, it's possibly, an interesting perspective. Not that I know what the other side is, being a woman myself, I think that, especially on, IVM, it could be an interesting sort of voice, I guess, to have and for
most definitely
people to hear from. And so it's this great sort of combination that I've found between being an entrepreneur, talking to people that are really super interesting to talk to, and that I'm now just making, a show out of, conversations that I love having, and a little bit of food thrown in for good measure.
Wonderful. On that note, thank you for sparing this 45 minutes to an hour to be on this show. Kavita and I have actually been talking about having you on for a while, and we were trying to figure out how should we do this. And I'm very excited to have you on, not just because it's a completely sort of new perspective to what we generally talk about on this show, which is a lot more media, entertainment, technology, startups and stuff like that. But also because from what I've read about you, you've got an amazing story, right? There's uncertainty, there is decisiveness, there is success, I'm sure there have been hard times as well. And I'd love for you to get us started by telling us a little bit about your journey. I'll set it up for you. Sometime around 2008 to 2010, you are in London, you're tax consultant, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's still hard to believe, right? So I'm just making sure it was that. And 2010-11, you decided to start The Table with your partner. And 10 years on, almost, here we are, right? So in that, while I've yada over the good parts, I'll tee it up for you. How did you take that decision? It's a massive shift at a time when everything was still not as developed as it is now. It was still sort of in its infancy, growing out of it. How did you make that decision? Can you talk us through that journey?
Sure. I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit, because the fact that it was not that developed was where the opportunity really sort of lay for us. But I'll sort of rewind a little bit. So I'm a born and bred Bombay girl. Went to study law at university in London. During that, I did an internship with an accounting firm and one of the big four firms. Being the math geek that I am, I absolutely loved it. And I ended up sort of working with a big four firm and qualified as a chartered accountant. And it was this great combination of my legal background and my love for math. And worked there for about 5 years. Finally realized that I hated the London weather and I just couldn't handle it. The summers were just shrinking like year by year. And so I moved back to Bombay end of 2007. But I continued working with the same firm in Bombay. And that's also when I met my now husband, Jay Yusuf. So he had actually just moved back from San Francisco to Bombay. We were both wallowing in our misery of moving back here. And, whatever, one thing led to another. I was quietly going about my day job, whereas he, in spite of being a techie, and with absolutely no background in hospitality, was in parallel brewing this idea of opening a restaurant in Bombay. And I kind of understood where, he was coming from. in one respect, because like you said, it was a very underdeveloped industry in Bombay, and there was definitely a need for a lot more. But whether we were the right people to do that was obviously questionable. But anyway, so he kept going at it, and I thought it was a midlife crisis that would soon pass, but it didn't. And I just kind of started dabbling to help him out with the financial and legal aspects, so that he wasn't sort of signing away his entire wealth or something. And about 3 years later, because that's how long it takes sometimes to find the right space to sort of convince a landlord to, get going, to figure out what you actually want to do, find an architect. Yes, that's exactly how long it took us. With actually, I have to tell you, there was a murder involved, not of any of us, but of the property that we were about to rent, as well as changing our architect halfway through the project and starting out from scratch again. So all of that malarkey, 3 years later.
Wait, for a second, this is a detective podcast.
Yeah. Then in Jan 2011 is when we finally opened the doors. Oh, and we got married a month before that. So yeah, it was a rather eventful year. Few years.
That sounds really eventful. How did you find time to do anything?
Yeah, I know. I'm surprised we're still married today, frankly. But anyway, so how did I get involved? I think, I just found myself getting more and more sort of sucked into it, watching him do it. And then eventually I realized I was kind of like doing 2 full-time jobs, and, that wasn't obviously working out. So I decided to take a year out, try this whole restaurant thing out for a bit. And and here I am sort of 10 years later, still toiling away. But I love it. I love every bit of it. And, since we opened the table back in 2011, there's been, quite a few developments. We've obviously grown the business in what I would think is a rather unconventional way. But, we didn't just do one restaurant after the other. So, we have a bakery brand. We do have a second restaurant, which is a completely different cuisine. And we also have a restaurant that we closed 18 months after opening it. We have an experimental kitchen space. So yeah, a lot has happened. We've now actually launched an Indian delivery brand as well. So, a lot has happened in the last 10 years, which has been great fun, huge learnings, and and a very interesting time to see how the hospitality industry has sort of evolved.
That's a great introduction. Before I go further and talk about the restaurant business, I really want to ask you this, right? I can see the enthusiasm for your day job when you were talking about it, right? The love for math and love for what you're doing really comes through, right? And for any career person, right? When you really like what you do, you're in a good place. Sure, London and the weather is one thing, but it's a difficult decision, right? You must have had your next 5 years planned out, saying, hey, these are the things I'm going to try and do. And from then on to say, all right, brand new thing, love of my life, I'm going to switch on over to this. Can you just walk us through that decision? I know I'm asking you maybe 13, 14 years after the fact, but I would love to know how someone makes that kind of a complex decision.
So I'm actually someone who, being a sort of lawyer and accountant kind of mindset, I was someone who, everything had to be like fit in properly. Otherwise it really messed with my head. And you're right. When I sort of started out on my professional career as an accountant, I definitely and when you work with a company, you kind of have your career charted out, so you do have that 5-year plan potentially, and you kind of just go along making sure you're sort of on track. I think that completely goes out of the window when you sort of wear the entrepreneur hat instead. And if you ask me today what our 5-year plan is, it is with vis-a-vis the restaurant business, I will say I don't even know. And I don't know what the right thing is to do, and I don't know if that's the right answer or not. But that's one thing that, has really been the way Jay and I have operated, where it's very much, been an adventure for us. And it's something that I think the reason we really enjoy it is because we've not gone at it like a conventional business mind would. And we've really picked the projects and we've sort of developed this business in a direction based on what has kind of excited us, as opposed to what possibly would be the right thing to do. And in fact, a lot of the things we did, so I mentioned this experimental kitchen. It's this old warehouse in the middle of Ray Road. I don't know if you're familiar with that area.
I am.
In the harbour area of Bombay, where honestly you wouldn't be going there on your way to anything.
Yeah.
And, it was a 2,500 square foot space that we took over and built this, what we think is a beautiful kitchen. And people actually came, even though everyone said, you're crazy, nobody's going to come here. Everyone has been, from... We've had like Bollywood to the Ambanis to, like international chefs to everyone come, fall in love with the space, even if they've got completely lost along the way and, wondered where the hell they are. So I think it's that kind of thing, that excitement to do something, to take a risk and do something challenging that's really, kept us going all these years. And that doesn't come with a 5-year plan necessarily. So... I have to say that Jay, from pretty much the day he got to Bombay, has been saying, I'm going to move back to San Francisco every year. But then we keep doing new projects here. So, obviously that's more in his head than, actually happening. But so, coming back to your question, it's really a different, and it took me a few years, honestly, to sort of shed that wanting to know where everything was going kind of mindset. But, in terms of making the switch, it was quite planned in my head because, me being the risk-averse person, I kind of figured I've been doing my sort of accounting role for 9 years and I'm just going to take a year out. It's like a sabbatical. And what's the worst, right? It doesn't work out. And I was pretty confident that I could go back to, doing what I was doing, which I also enjoyed. Yeah, it was kind of like a calculated risk for me. But it's, like I said, we are still doing this. So
sorry about the doorbell there. But no, I know exactly who it is as well. So it's a great introduction to how you arrived at that decision. I think obviously looking at the list of restaurants that you're running in, restaurants or food businesses that you're running, there's The Table, there's Magazine Saint Kitchen, there's Magazine Saint Bread Company.
Magazine Street, yeah.
Magazine Street, I'm so sorry.
Right? No. So you know that whole area is called Daru Khana. Okay? Right. And it's not Daru Khana, ironically, it's not Daru Khana as in alcohol and food, it's Daru Khana as in gunpowder. It goes in ammunition because that's where the Brits used to come and it's near the harbor, right? So that's where all the ammunition used to get stored during the Brits were here.
Right.
And magazine is
the gun
English.
Magazine.
Yeah. So that's how that street is called Magazine Street. And so you're like, okay, let's go with Magazine Street Kitchen.
Yeah, that's
a little bit of trivia for you.
Yeah, and I'm sure. I mean, that kind of trivia and that kind of name lends itself to the storytelling around the place as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like you kind of asked, you're not the first person to sort of, wonder what's behind the name. And it's a little bit of, history because we also didn't know what we were doing with this space, right? It's a space, it's one of a kind of space. It wasn't a restaurant. It wasn't just a back kitchen kind of thing. So we kind of, and so it was important also for us to associate with the neighborhood that we were in. And a little bit of sort of the remnants of the British Raj that's crept into.
No, I mean it's lovely, and it's also kind of tags back very neatly to the fact that you spent so long in London. But what I wanted to get at was that's a very diverse set of sort of food businesses, so to speak, right? And the restaurant business is historically difficult and fickle. What works today may not work tomorrow. Where works today may not work tomorrow. Patrons have a mind of their own. They want new things, old things. So I want to tag back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier as well, right? Is how do you, at Food Matters, decide, okay, this is what we're going to do? Or how do you kind of survey your consumer and understand where you're trying to lead it? Is there are you a company of small experiments, or are you a company of, okay, we know exactly what we're trying to do. This is our big bet, all in. Let's see what happens, right? I mean, just want to understand how you wrap your head around of a consumer as fickle as this.
So I think what's always driven the decisions we make is using ourselves as a consumer. Right. And that was actually the intent behind even The Table. We because neither of us are from, the restaurant industry prior to that, every decision we made about what we wanted in that restaurant, how we wanted the service sort of protocols to be, every single detail of that business was driven by what we would want if we went out to dine. And I think it's been the same at every step of the way. So even when it comes to the bakery, it was literally like, we felt like we wanted good breads in the city and, we didn't have access to that at a reasonable price. And, hey, we were doing it anyway for our restaurant. So why not now just do it on a larger scale? And it came from sort of deep diving into something we were doing already and sort of, turning it on its head as a new business opportunity. So I think, we didn't feel the need to at every point create something new from scratch. There's a lot that you can do from, what you've already built because there was so much learning that went in for us. And, we've never put pressure on ourselves to, say that, okay, within 5 years, we need to have 10 restaurants or, we have to have at least this much revenue or whatever. And so it's really been about first finessing and mastering what we've created and then seeing how we can, kind of, for want of a better word, milk that to generate, more revenue.
Right.
And so when it comes to, again, the consumer aspect, like I said, everything that we've done, in our industry, and I'm sure this applies to sort of many industries, you have to remember that you can't please everyone, right? So who's your ideal consumer when you're talking about doing something from a consumer's perspective? I think, the best one is going to be yourself, right? That's what really, that's the one that you understand the best. And there are going to be people who are like-minded, and then there are going to be people who don't get what you're doing, right? So,
absolutely,
that's essentially how we've approached pretty much everything we've done.
And it sort of resonates with many of the sort of non-entertainment startup stories that you hear as well, right? With Brian Chesky starting Airbnb because he couldn't find a place to stay at a friend's house, and he just went from there. So I think that's
it's a need that you're filling, that you feel on a large level that you kind of feel you want to fulfill. I mean, that's how most successful, I think, entrepreneurs work, is that you're finding you're filling a gap that exists.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a kind of early learning, early conceptual model of how you will work in the new space that I think is very interesting.
Right. And which is, just one thing I want to add is that, which is why I always say to people that if you just do something because you see someone else do it successfully and you think you can do it cheaper and better, that's usually not the way, to sort of... That should not be the motivation necessarily behind something. Yeah.
No, sure. I mean, there are different, I would say, entrepreneurs at sort of different stages of thought leadership or leading edge, right? And then you'll always have guys who come in to try and do whatever you're trying to do on a budget, right? I think of it as thrash metal. People play really fast guitar and then someone comes and says, I can play faster, because if it's that competition, that's different. But the guy who went first obviously took a risk that nobody else did, right? But that's it. I think what you touched upon there was a super learning that's important to have early in your journey, I'm sure, for it to be a conceptual model of how you do things, right? Now, going back to the table, you started 2011, I think December 2011, you already won an award. and that kind of success kind of breeds and replicates, right? Can you talk us through a few more of your early learnings there? Maybe how you programmed your menus, maybe what your inspiration around decor was, how you reached that ideal consumer or that 1% consumer that you were looking at. I'd love to know, especially with the table, what your early learnings were that you kind of took and put in other places as well.
Sure. So one of the most interesting things which I can say with the benefit of hindsight is that we really stuck to our guns on what the concept was. So and what we introduced with the table, so everything from the fact that it was an ingredient-driven cuisine, right? So it was what we call a globally inspired menu and an ingredient-driven cuisine. So everyone was like, well, what the hell is that? Are you Chinese? Are you Italian? Are you, continental? And people couldn't understand what that concept was. And we just said, no, it's cuisine agnostic and it's about making an ingredient the star. And that's what it is. So just come and submit yourself to the chef and, enjoy your meal. You don't have to pigeonhole it into, a specific type of cuisine. We introduced this concept of small plates and large plates. Again, everyone was like, oh, is this some fancy way of saying appetizers and mains? We had this community table in the restaurant.
One of the first to have a community table.
Yeah. And, it's funny. That was my one contribution other than the name, which is inspired by the community table, by the way, which I remember this cafe in London right near my office that had this huge, it was a coffee shop, which had this huge table in the middle and a big pot of sugar, brown sugar, just in the middle. And everyone used to just flock around it and have their coffee. And you didn't know anyone and you didn't necessarily know. You could sit there by yourself and still feel like you were with other people. And it just had this incredible vibe. And of course, I had no intention of opening a restaurant back then, but it just stuck with me. And I told Jay when he was sort of working with the architects and things, I said that, okay, this is your baby, you're doing whatever, just have a community table in there somewhere. That's my 2 cents, But anyway, coming back to, again, for Bombay, the idea of sitting next to a stranger and having your meal, all of this was sort of not, something everyone was, it wasn't sort of going down the way, but for us, it was always the last table to get filled up. It was always like, okay, fine, if you don't have a table, we'll sit there. And today it's like one of the most sought after seats in the restaurant.
And it's thoroughly enjoyable table to sit at.
It is. And it's great. And especially for where we're located, which is a very touristy area. There's a lot of people who are like, solo diners who don't want to sit at a table, a private table by themselves. It's a great sort of space to sit at. And, so anyway, there were a lot of new concepts that were kind of being thrown at our diner. And I think and of course, people are very liberal with feedback, which they should be. I mean, it's great to get feedback. I mean, that's what kind of fuels what we do. But at the same time, we didn't want to just, every time we got a piece of sort of, critical or constructive feedback, it doesn't mean you sort of keep reacting to everything and keep changing what you're doing. Right. And I think one thing that really sort of stood us in good stead was that we sort of were very clear in our minds about what we were trying to do. And realizing that, okay, some people will respond to it and some respond to it positively and some won't take to it was, I think, one of the most important things that, we accepted very early on and not trying to please everybody. So this was really important to us. And then over the years, people sort of didn't know why, but they kind of took to it. They may not have been able to identify why. It could have been the food, it could have been the ambience, it could have been, and I would say it took us a good 2 or 3 years to get to a point where we had a really great fan following, and it just sort of spiraled from there. So, I think the lesson, the takeaway from that was about being patient. And when you're doing something new and you're introducing something new, having the patience to let it work, giving it that time to sort of, get into your
take hold
psyche.
Forward,
I mean, it doesn't, not everything's going to be an overnight success. And, you have to be willing to. And in the case of a restaurant business, it also means being able to fund it for that much longer. So, of course, it comes with that price. But if you believe in it, then, it's worth holding out, so to speak. I think one other lesson, which proved itself actually when we did our second restaurant, which didn't actually work out in the restaurant format, was that, I mentioned earlier that it took us 3 years to build the table. So from the time we actually signed the lease to opening its doors, it was 14 months, which honestly in the restaurant business is way too long. I mean, you do not take that long to build a restaurant. And the reason that it did was like I said, we changed our architect 4 months in, scrapped everything they'd done till then and just started from scratch. And it was because there was just something that didn't feel right,
Right.
But it was one of the hardest decisions we've ever made because you've spent so much already. Your rent is kicked in. You may get a few months of rent-free period when you're fitting out your space, but that's literally about it. It's a few, like 2, maybe 3 months if you're lucky. And it's a really tough decision to make. But it's the best thing we did, honestly, because what we did end up with and the architect we did end up with and the space we did end up with was something that we 100% were on board with. It wasn't like okay, I'm 85% okay with this. I'm sure the 15 will just figure itself out.
Yeah.
It never does. And that's kind of what happened with our second restaurant, Miss Tea, which we did about 8 years after the table. And we kind of, at this point we had investors and we felt a little bit of pressure on ourselves to, we were like, oh, now we're veterans. We've done like the restaurant business for whatever, 5, 7, 8 years. We should be able to do this faster, quicker, And I think we kind of put that pressure on ourselves to a point where we opened where we were that 85, 90% okay with it. And honestly, because it was our second restaurant, people came rushing out to check it out.
Right.
It was that 10% that we weren't okay with that actually backfired badly enough to, end up making us decide to close it. So
right.
I think those are the two things that I would say, is our biggest sort of learning is that, if you're not okay with it even a little bit, don't don't sort of go live with it, so to speak.
I think those are like pearls of wisdom.
Yeah. And then the other thing was just that, kind of have a clear concept, go into something knowing what you want to do with that clarity, and then kind of give it a chance to actually, do its thing.
Yeah, flourish and grow. I think you talked about it with the experience of someone who's been there, done that. And it just really comes through, man. There is this concept called the sophomore slump, right? When someone who does well on their first thing, sometimes the second bit is 19-20 there, right? And I think the way you talked about it was super clear that, yeah, man, we put pressure on ourselves and we went out with we did exactly the things that we thought we'd mastered with the first one. We didn't do with the second one. So great learning there. And I think you put it very, 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 very nicely. I want to ask you a little bit more about the restaurants and the sort of food businesses that you've grown. And this is more from a marketing lens, right? Obviously, when you get in there to run a lifestyle entertainment business or a restaurant business, right? It's not just the clarity you need is not just, okay, are my unit economics positive or not, right? You need to figure out whether the person who comes here goes out and talks to 5 other people or not, right? So with all of that in there, right? And with the success of the table in there, how do you then choose to market all of these as businesses, right? There's obviously the restaurant way of doing it, which is, hey, we've got today's cuisine is this, and today this live band is performing, come watch, right? And then there's the whole experiential way of doing it, the lifestyle way of doing it. I know that you've done a podcast, which is a very different way of looking at marketing a food business, right? Are there some other interesting ways that you've gone about trying to build those brands? Not all of them might have been successful, but I'd love to hear some of those.
Yeah. I think taking a step back. So firstly, you absolutely hit the nail on the head that for a restaurant, no amount of PR and marketing will work for you like word of mouth does.
Right.
Okay. And that's for free. So firstly, sorry, I don't know if I'm trashing all over your business, but it's literally when it comes to food, it can the good word or the bad word can spread like wildfire, and that's what you really need. You need the good word to spread like wildfire. So firstly, create a kick-ass product, because
Absolutely.
honestly, you can't buy that word of mouth, with any amount. But, of course, once you've opened a restaurant and yes, word is out, etc., how do you sustain that? Like I said, we're now almost 10 years into the restaurant. So what is it that's kind of still resonating with people, so far down the line? And I have to say, this industry is one where it has, I think about a 90% failure rate. So, for us, it's quite a milestone to even have got this far.
About 98% for my business.
Oh, okay. So you win.
I lose, actually.
True. So I think what I realize is, of course, your product is a given, right? The quality of your food and, beverage experience has to be consistently good. And that's one of the things that, where restaurants really fall, is that you start with this bang and then it kind of fizzles out because you start cost cutting, etc.
Right.
So that base level sort of quality has to be maintained. But I think what we've done successfully is to connect with people beyond that. So maintaining that experience when you come to the restaurant and, having that, at the end of the day, our business is about hospitality. It's not about food and beverage, right? Like there are hundreds of restaurants that people can choose to order from, to, go to. What is it?
You can achieve ceteris paribus on the menu, but you can't achieve equality, parity on the experience.
Exactly. And so firstly, that is something which is this, it's this sort of unquantifiable, or, it's just an
intangibles.
It's this intangible thing that you have to, you have to get right. And that is what really creates the starting point of a connect with, our diner. Beyond that, I think what's been interesting, so of course we've done various sort of, marketing kind of, fun sort of promotions and things like, the podcast, for example, was a great one, which is then there for, the long haul. It's not just during your like opening period or, that kind of thing. But what was interesting, I mean, I'll give you another example has been during lockdown actually, right? So it's been about 5 months since we closed the restaurant.
Very, very long months.
5 months today, actually. And like I said, the restaurants are one thing that you can't work from home.
Right.
So how do we continue to connect with our audience? Of course, everyone's doing delivery and continuing to serve the food, but that's not even a patch on the experience that you have when you dine in a restaurant. So how do you continue to connect? And so I'll give you two or three small examples of what we did. One was very early on, we started talking about, because the people, our team is so critical to our brand. We started sharing what they were going through during the lockdown. Because otherwise it's always about, these are the issues restaurants are facing, government's not doing this, we're like, we're screwed. It was all like this, but we were just like, hey, remember those people that, you miss, that you don't realize that's what you actually miss about the restaurant experience. This is what they're up to. So we started sharing stories about, and it wasn't like depressing. They were just talking about, hey, now I'm getting to spend time with my kid that I, rarely get to see because I'm working crazy hours. And people really resonated. Someone had a baby like a week into the lockdown. And so, we shared that news, and, and people were like, hey, and so the kind of like response we were getting from our guests, was, it sort of just reinforced that bond between the people behind the business and, and our guests, diners. So that was an interesting thing. The other thing we did is I'm generally the face of the brand, and I'm always the one out there. And of course, everyone was doing Instagram Live, so we had to jump onto that bandwagon.
Did you do it at 5 o'clock as well?
Of course. So instead of me doing the lives, which would have been the obvious thing, I actually got my team members, sitting at home, from different parts of so even like, one of our restaurant manager interviewed actually Aditi Surana, who has a show, on the network, right, to talk about how to handle anxiety. We got someone else to talk to the team about how to handle motivation. And it wasn't something, I could have just done this as like an internal thing for my team members.
Right.
But actually, I was like, the entire industry is going through this. And so, let's just do this on a public forum. And again, it was not selling food. It was not selling food and beverage. But the name would keep popping up, right? So you still sort of are there in people's minds through some other,
a more cultural aspect of
and that's what was the need of the hour, right? I mean, I couldn't sell you food and beverage, so what was I doing other than that? And we're still, it's that the brand is still live. It's still alive, rather, even when the restaurant's shut. I think that was the important thing. Then recently we did something really fun where outside the table, we put up a flex every week or 10 days, which just has something fun on it. That's, so we were saying something that, one time we put one up saying, sort of be positive. And it was about being positive has two meanings today. And, we're talking about, the
good one
that doesn't involve a test.
Right.
Or, like recently we put one up saying, there's, the sobo salad from the table, there's truffle fried rice from Misty, There's Ran Biryani from Iktara, and then there's Seema Taparia from Mumbai.
Right.
Yeah. So it was just, and literally that went viral. I mean, it got written about in the papers. And we're just having fun, honestly. We're just like, imagine you're driving past, like, whatever, Kulaba, and you just see this and it makes you laugh. For me, my job's done. The restaurant's closed, but you're just like, that it's something that I sort of connected with someone even for like that fleeting sort of 10 seconds. And it could, that sort of, people drive past, take photographs. And all my brands were named in there, like, coincidentally. And
it's a cool.
Yeah, it was hilarious. Like that. I think it was the most viral post of anything we put on Instagram, like since we opened, So for me, that's what this restaurant's about. It's also about having a sense of humor, having fun, and having like, an identity that goes beyond your product. And
I love it.
Yeah. It's like the Amul girl, right? Like it's that. It's exactly that. It's like, you're not buying butter every time you drive past Chowpatty, but
absolutely.
Everyone knows the Amul girl, right? So.
Yeah, and I love it. I love it when, especially entrepreneurs talk about putting their brand out there in a way that is non-transactional, right? I mean,
exactly.
We're just putting it out there because, hey, you're the people.
It's a sentiment, that's the important thing, because that's not going to go away anywhere. Our menu will keep changing, and it's that sentiment that you just know, like, hey, I don't care what's on the menu. I'm going to go there because that's where I have this connect. Like I feel at home there, so yeah.
Well, absolutely beautiful. I'm going to take this conversation to a slightly darker side, but COVID in general has been super hard for the sector, right? I love eating out, but for the past 5 months, I've realized that, hey, I actually don't like going out that much. I just like having great food because I'm like super cowardly, super scared about getting COVID, right? I mean, just can't go out. Now, in such a scenario, and I can't be the only person who's feeling this way, right? In such a scenario, while there are people who really want normalcy, so to speak, to return, how is the sector dealing overall? And according to you, where's the light at the end of the tunnel for the sector, so to speak, right? I know it's a sort of crystal ball gazy Nostradamus question, but it's at least it's the best we can do is figure where we're seeing hope come through from, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So of course the sector's in the shits, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But it's really, and there is going to be a lot of what I call correction that happens, and has happened and, will happen during this period. So it's given people a lot of time to, re-look at their business model. And in some cases, things were not working out even prior to COVID. I mean, hey, we had with the CA riots and everything that was going on, like that hit us because people were cancelling their trips. There was almost like a travel advisory against coming, to some of the main cities. And,
right.
So that hit us well before COVID. And, so there's been a slew of things that have been affecting our industry, even going back a little further, even something like GST really hit us badly.
Right.
And so this almost was like the last nail in the coffin for a lot of businesses. And I think that, it almost made that decision that you've been putting off as an entrepreneur who loves your baby, putting that sort of thing that you should do, but you're just kind of, living on hope right now. This kind of has made that decision a lot easier for a lot of businesses. I have friends who've, shut down their restaurants. And for the others, I think it's literally about survival. It's like if you can get through, obviously, the lockdown, but then also the next 6 to 9 months, whether it means tightening up your costs, whatever it is, like with any business, at the end of the day, like Ranveer Bra, who's actually one of the guests on one of my shows, said that everyone needs breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? It's not something you can do without. So, it's not like this is the death knell for restaurants, but it's something that you just have to be a little smarter about. And, people will come back. And if we look at what's happening in the rest of the world, like Europe and even parts of America, which have reopened and things, I mean, I look at like Europe because that's, I think, the one that's kind of opened up the most. It's giving us a lot of hope of, what sort of will be, once sort of things do sort of settle down a little bit. So I'm actually overall like very positive on, coming back, but a lot of it hinges for our industry. A lot of it hinges on actually landlords. That's actually what's really driving this industry, because it's one of those businesses that you can't just say, oh, you know what, like my office turns out it was redundant. I can continue doing this from home. Or, I'm going to move into a co-working space. You can't do that with restaurants, right? So absolutely. This really actually hinges on that. And I think what's going to happen, which is great, is just a correction. So not just of restaurants and, sort of almost
land prices, I guess, in general.
But yeah. And all of this is, eventually going to give a boost to our industry. It's not something that you might see like in the short term, but it's definitely going to have a long-term impact, a positive impact for our industry. So, I think that I don't have that crystal ball to know when, restaurants will open, how long it's going to take to kind of, come back to the levels we were at before. But I'm kind of positive that it will there will be positive outcomes of this whole situation. And, without going into sort of the food aspect and the food trends, which, I can sort of talk a bit about, but what's been amazing actually is to see the camaraderie in the industry. So I think the industry coming together and now sort of understanding what it sort of stands for, what it contributes to sort of the wider sort of social lives of people. I think it's realized its kind of power in being able to now change the dynamic in terms of who's, dictating what to restaurants, right? So it's, I think, more from a business perspective. I'm talking more from a business perspective. It's very interesting times actually for restaurants. Yeah. And overall, like, hey, restaurants are going to come back and people are going to dine out again. We just 2 weeks ago restarted our Sunday bake sale at the table. And we didn't actually know what to expect. So we started with, a limited amount of product. And literally it starts at 8 a.m. and 8:45 it was all cleaned up. Right. Because people are just out and they're like, oh, I can go and like actually buy food. I don't have to order online. I don't have to get this on my app, or I can come see something and say, hey, I'll have those 2 croissants, or, and there was just some joy that comes from that. And people are craving it, they're sort of, so it'll take time, but it's going to happen. I'm sort of optimistic about that.
No, absolutely. I think the human need to get out there can't be held hostage.
Need to be like social. I think that's, I think that's the key thing that we all actually, the food and beverage, like I said, is there. It's right. It's like right now it's in a delivery format, if not in the restaurant, but there's this need to be social that is
it's undeniable. Yeah. No, but to that point, right, though, in terms of new formats, I think adversity does always lead to some kind of innovation. It also leads to death of bad business models. It's something that's been around since the dot-com bubble. You want to look at the 08 recession, you want to look at now. First casualties outside of, advertising spends is companies with sort of wonky business models, right? But it also leads to a lot of interesting innovation, pop-ups, delivery, new formats, concepts, all of that I expect will come back in a new, interesting way, right? Because when the market does open up, it will again be 30,000 restaurants in Bombay opening up all at once, right? Yeah. And everybody will be out there looking for patrons to come there and kind of get back to the glory days, so to speak, right? I mean, I'll give you an example for in terms of what I've seen happen, and then I'd love to ask you about how you see this evolving. The best grilled cheese in this city is this thing called the Fromagerie, right?
Yes. The girl called which we collaborate with, by the way. The bread is ours.
The bread is yours?
Yes.
Yeah, you should only. So it's insane, right? The Fromagerie. And incidentally, my wife designed the logo for the fromagerie. Right?
No way. Okay.
So as a close friend.
3 degrees of separation.
pretty much, right? So, and she's one of the only friends we've seen over the lockdown. Like maybe we've seen 3 or 4 friends.
Yeah.
One of them. So, but for her, right, it's a business that's completely pop-up driven, right? So for my listeners, the fromagerie is grilled cheese sandwiches, the yummiest, sold at events, right? She doesn't have a restaurant yet.
We now sell those kits. That's part of the thing that we do to our bakery.
I was just going to come to that. So the way she's done those deconstructed kits, right? It's basically a sandwich kit, and it's the most luxurious sandwich kit, but it's a sandwich kit nonetheless, right? And so you can get bread from the table, fromagerie, grilled cheese, whatever else she's putting in, the pulled pork or the beef or whatever else, no beef, off, whatever, and she's putting it out there, right? Now that's an adaptable model, right? For a pop-up to quickly turn into sort of this deconstructed kit that'll come to your house, and there's an experience, and she's built that in with a masterclass that's happening. She does those training. Nusa does those training.
We did the masterclass.
I'm so sorry.
So this is a perfect example of how, brands have kind of, I mean, sorry to cut you off, but like just to explain, like we at Magazine Street Kitchen, the whole idea of that kitchen was we used to do these, cooking workshops because we had this beautiful equipment and people could come and use like professional equipment and learn from chefs and things. And we've had to take that to a digital space now, right? So, we've been doing online cooking workshops, and we did a Sunday brunch one with Nusa with the grilled cheese DIY to launch the grilled cheese DIY kit. And it was a huge hit. I was like, I'm not sure, like, are people going to like buy this kit for like whatever, there was a class and it was the most fun thing. I can't cook.
Yeah.
I literally die on the sidewalk, because I can't even cook to save myself. And we did this, but I managed to do the grilled cheese sandwich with my 7-year-old. And it was such a fun morning, and she still remembers it. And we all just like pigged out, like they were gone in like 3 seconds. But this is, and now we sell those kits as part of our wider offering from the bakery. It's a collaboration, and it's great. So it's definitely, someone, thinking out of the box sort of to keep their business going.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I love the energy and the spunk that Nusa brings to hers. But what I wanted to lead into, and again, great surprise. Obviously, I have very little information about the restaurant business. I should ask Nusa about. But no, what I was building at, Gauri, is this is also a way of not just taking the food, but the experience to people, right? I mean, you go to a fromagerie stall, and the joy that you're talking about here, you stand outside a fromagerie stall at Weekender or wherever else, and that same experience comes through, right? It's the fun, joyous, 3-4 people there that they have, Nusa herself there. Do you see this sort of a model becoming more and more popular going forward? And I mean, part 2 of this question is, while we're seeing this kind of application of technology, like with video and masterclasses and all of that happen, are there other examples that you see playing out, other things that you're considering doing with technology to make sure that the experience remains intact?
Yeah, so we're trying to find this balance. First of all, I have to say that in the last 5 months, I feel like I had a mini tech degree. I got a mini tech degree, a crash course in tech, just because for our entire business, suddenly overnight, we had to become really tech savvy. So, for example, we've been trying to set up our own delivery, because delivery is obviously like our main, bread and butter, like pardon the pun. And so how do we do that in the most cost-effective way? And that meant setting up our own delivery platform rather than going through the aggregators where, we pay a large sort of chunk of commission to them. So, like figuring out, okay, you're like being thrown with like products. The first month of I think of lockdown, I was being thrown with like hand sanitizer and masks. And then the second month, it started becoming, these tech platforms that, where we could set up our own menus and, delivery. And then, I don't know, like I kind of like lost the plot from the third month onwards. But, so I really had to figure out how to do this. And it's very interesting because I wrote a piece about this for Condé Nast Traveler about saying that, they talk about contactless dining, about going into restaurants and you not having to like potentially meet another human and still have your entire meal. And I was like, that is the worst thing that I can think of. I was like, those humans are the ones that actually make your restaurant experience what it is. So,
absolutely.
For me, it's been very important to try and find that balance between tech and that experience that you're talking about. And, the class that we did with Nusa is a perfect example of that, where, generally like cooking classes are considered like they have to be like this super technical, it's like professional. And that whole idea of just having fun with cheese and bread and butter. I mean, like, who does that, right? Who thought that you could do a whole, like, class around it? And sending out these kits to people, I mean, the amount of joy it brought, again, to people at home is incredible. So
I can testify to that joy.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is I think it's really about finding that balance between, just sort of, becoming like, going to sort of the tech route versus using that losing that human touch. And so what we've been doing actually is we've been doing more of these. So for example, we're about to do a cheese and wine pairing workshop, because there are a lot of people who are like, hey, let me learn something new. And but what we're going to do is we're going to send like the mini bottles of wine and a variety of cheeses to people's homes. So again, it's not theory. It's not like you're just talking to someone across the screen, but there's also like, some yummies in front of you, and you can do that. From a restaurant perspective, yes, you can send food in a, takeaway box to people in delivery, but when it gets to them, just having a little bit of more information on how to maybe reheat it or
store it,
sending it in, or like, how long it's going to. So I think that restaurants have kind of are trying to, again, just be hospitable to you, even if you're having that experience at home. I think that's what it comes back to, whether there's an element of tech thrown in or not. So I mean, I think that it's that the key thing here is hospitality again, and, doing it well and doing it, in a fun way. That's what it all comes back to. But the other thing that, in our business, for example, has happened is that it's forced us to do things that we've been saying, yes, we're going to look at this, we're going to look at this. And we're now like, do it right now. You have to do it right now. So for example, with our bakery and our Indian delivery brand, which is called Ektara, which we, by the way, launched 3 weeks before lockdown. So the Indian delivery brand, Ektara. And we were like, this is like the worst timing, but it actually was the best timing, because delivery was everything. And we were like set up, ready, like to, go live, as soon as we were allowed to. But, what we started doing is we started doing weekly deliveries to Alibag, because there's this mass exodus of people who are living there.
Everybody who's living there.
Yeah. And they were just going nuts. Like now it's been like 5 weeks, so they're used to it. And now a lot of other restaurants are doing it as well. But in the beginning, they were like, what? Are you for real? Like, we can get your croissants here, and we can get your, whatever, like naan biryani, and we can get the butter chicken. And I was like, yeah, you can. Like, we'll deliver it. And because we have our place there, we have the Table Farm, which is our farm in Alibag. So we had like a sort of central point from which we could kind of, distribute. And it's sort of, so, that thing of like thinking on your feet. And again, it's about, bringing to people some joy, right? That's what it comes down to in the form of food. And they were all like, oh, what about the table food? And we said, no, because that food doesn't travel well. So it's, again, very easy to say, Arey, just do it now. Like, they're willing to pay for it. Just do it and, send it like now, then it's there. And we were like, no, you don't want to compromise this brand that you've built, over 10 years, where then someone's going to say that, because that's the decision that lies with you at the end of the day. And it's not all commerce, it's really important for us to sort of, be careful about, retaining that goodwill that we've built over the years. And now we're like delivering to Pune as well once a week. So it's something that, we're like, yes, we'll scale up these brands over, like, over time. And we're just like, we'll do it. It's on the cards. And like, we've just had to do it right now because we didn't have a choice, So it's a small step, but the point is you've done it, and then you're like, oh, actually we can do this. And it wasn't that hard. And, so it's sort of pushed us in a good way to, a little bit out of our comfort zone to do something sooner rather than whenever.
That's absolutely smashing. I think what's really stood out for me is how you talked about choosing your own delivery fleet as well, right? Because in this sort of world of a commoditized delivery experience, hello bhaiya, main aapke gate pe hu, aap niche aa rahe ho ya main upar aa raha hu, versus Alibag, have your own whatever, farmhouse or summer house, and here's great food. But it's not just any food, right? It's not like, wait, you wanted, the pork belly and it doesn't travel, so we can't send it to you. But this is what we can, and here, enjoy. I mean, I think there's a great way of keeping the experience alive, I think, in there. And the more this continues, I think technology is going to come to our aid a little more than it has previously, right? And this is something that we're seeing everywhere, people accelerating their business decisions to make sure that, you're capitalizing on it, right? For example, I'll give you my acceleration story, right? Kavita and I would always talk about how are we going to get a guest from Delhi? Because we used to do studio recording sessions.
Right,
as I'm
exactly.
sure you did. Right? And then the lockdown happened, and I just got a little bit of a home setup and said, I can do things at home. So I can totally relate to that, right? Just technology that has always been around, but we never looked at it because we had this one way of doing things, and now we're like, hey, opportunity. Let me see what else we can do. Corey, it's been fascinating talking to you about this entire journey. I think there's so much to learn for the larger entertainment business from the way hospitality specifically, has taken to this, right? I want to ask you something that might be slightly different from restaurants, but a little more about hotels, and that's kind of where I want to bring the whole conversation to a close, right? While smaller restaurants or more bouquet restaurants are probably lending themselves slightly better to being managed during COVID, right? What is the sense that you're getting from restaurants that are affiliated with hotels or larger hotel chains themselves? Are they in a similar situation as well? Are they on figuring out recovery? And I want to know about India. I know in Europe there are places where bookings have started. Booking.com operates around 180 countries. About 102 are starting local travel. So it's looking up in certain places. But what's your sense in India? What's happening with restaurants that are part of larger hotel chains or chain restaurants for that matter?
So, I mean, it's definitely, hotels are being really badly hit. There's no doubt about it, both from the, the residential aspect as well as the, F&B. And honestly, like a hotel F&B kind of thrives on the sort of, the in-house guests as much as it does on, people coming from outside, like, non-resident guests. So with kind of hotels being closed, still in some cities, hotels being closed, like Bombay, for example, you still can't stay in a lot of places. And the restaurants are only permitted to open for resident guests. So they're not open to public yet. They're being really badly hit. There's no doubt about it. And honestly, like even before pre-COVID, hotel restaurants were sort of now, that sort of the glory days were kind of 5 stars kind of had at one point, have definitely sort of taken a bit of a hit over the last few years, and they're kind of competing a lot more with standalone restaurants. So, there was already added pressure on hotel restaurants, and this, has been a really sort of tough situation, for them.
Can the government do more? Is there something that the government can do? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot like that.
There is something the government can do. Yeah, look, there's a lot. I think every industry is sort of struggling, in a big way right now. But I think given the amount of direct and indirect employment that's generated by the tourism and hospitality industry, travel and tourism and hospitality, I think that it's definitely an industry that's been left behind. I mean, if you look at, for example, the UK, what the finance minister did over there was to say that restaurants would all be on 50% discount, but that amount would get subsidized by the government. So, the consumer benefits. It's a win-win literally for everyone. And that's how, you really need that support to, revive an industry after what it's been through. There's a lot more that can happen. But I think restaurants, they haven't given up, but they're kind of now just trying to sort of figure things out for themselves. Right. So, when it comes to hotels, of course, the fact that flights and things have resumed. I mean, I'm desperate to go off somewhere and take a.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I think it will happen, but there's a huge impact for hotels that goes far beyond what restaurants are facing right now.
Yeah, rent relief maybe would be a place to start.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one, right? Because while I would love that, it's something it's more of a private, matter. Whereas I think where the government can come in is, like for example, this of subsidizing restaurants somehow, or even on employee related, sort of remuneration, like
right.
You have PF, you have, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what, there's this thing called ESIC, which is essentially state insurance, right? So it's employee state insurance. We're like, well, it's insurance for these kind of situations. So like, why is this not kicking in now? That's the kind of thing that where the government can really come in, because they're the ones hurting, right? Yes, you've got properties, you've put money in, you've burnt cash already, but you've already burnt it. And of course, landlords is a whole separate thing. But when it comes to your own employees, that's what's kind of hurting us all as employers the most. It's just, feeling that our hands are tied and we can't, do much more than what's already happening. And in fact, what's funny is that a lot of private corporations are helping out, with making large donations to the industry. So a lot of alcohol sort of beverage companies, have made large contributions, which are intended for, the front of house staff of restaurants. But it's 5 months and we still don't know, how much longer. I mean, restaurants will literally be the last ones allowed to stand up. So, we're looking at potentially another few months. So it's like, it's a long period for someone to be, out of action.
It's a tough spot, and it's interesting how everyone but the people who are tasked with taking care of the people.
Yeah.
The people.
Yeah.
But
I have to say that I think the important, really, like, when you talked about like rent relief for landlords, it's, my sort of 2 cents on this subject is just that, we're all like, I do get where they're coming from in terms of you also needing to, there's no relief from banks, for example. There's no, so there is people who live off the rents and things. There is, but you have to find a happy place. You have to find that happy medium, which is where, a lot of conversations are breaking down. And that's really, it's like we're all in this shit together. So just, let's figure this. And it sounds so simple. And yet, it's...
No, it reminds me of this thing, and I'm sure you'll relate to it with your accounting background, that the book, Debt, a 2,000-year history, starts with the fact that the only common thing for debt throughout its history was that it has the ability to be forgiven or for you to have some kind of an adjustment there. It's not a set in stone kind of a thing, right? And which I think, yeah, you're right. There are linked payments that I'm sure landlords have to make, but there is I'm sure there is.
But again, it kind of goes back to the top, right? Which is your government and your banking system and all of that. So it's interesting times.
Yeah, it's a vicious, weird cycle. But don't let the last bit of our conversation take away from the gusto. Yes, with the gusto with which you've been running Food Matters and all the businesses under it. I'm a big fan of the table. I've been there a couple of times. One really drunk night and one not so drunk. Right. Gauri, it was wonderful having you on the show today. I learned a fair bit, apart from the fact that my favorite grilled cheese has your bread in it. But thank you so much for making time. It's wonderful to hear the optimism and the enthusiasm with which you're still pushing on. And I hope all of this clears up very, very quickly. And we are allowed to go back inside and sit at the community table at the table. Before I let you go, though, I have one question that I ask almost all my guests: is one entertainment recommendation. And because you're from the food industry and nobody's ever talked about restaurants as an entertainment recommendation, I'd love for you to recommend a restaurant for my listeners to go to once things are back to normal.
Oh, is this anywhere or is this...
Anywhere. One of your favorites, one of your own, whatever goes.
Well, I'm going to say, since right now restaurants unfortunately are closed, I'm going to give a shout out to something I've been ordering and really loving, which is Otupura. It's a friend, Marina Balakrishnan, who is, she's, I think, on Instagram as at Thalassery Girl, that Thalassery Girl, rather.
Right.
And so order it. It's really delicious, light food and immensely nourishing. So while restaurants, unfortunately, are closed, and of course, if you're looking for something a little more indulgent, we, of course, have Iktara, which I love, and with Ganpati around the corner, there's some yummy modaks being made right now as we speak. So these are my two little honest sort of recommendations for the time until restaurants reopen.
That's Otupura and modaks from Iktara. And I heard you talk about Ran Biryani, and
yes.
Can't say Ran Biryani without having my name on it. So I'm going to order that one as well. Gauri, lovely to have you on the show. I hope you had fun as well. Thank you for sharing about what you guys are up to at the table and beyond. And yeah, it's super lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much. This was fun, and it was great to be on the other side for a change. So, yeah. And not have the pressure of asking all the questions.
Hey, no pressure, man. When you got guests like you, there's no pressure. Fantastic.
Cool.
Thanks so much, Gauri.
Thank
all
you.
the best with your upcoming podcast. That's it from
Yes, 2nd September, guys. Tune in.
2nd September. It's called This Round's on Me. That's it from me, guys. This is Vineet Kanabar saying goodbye.
I hope you enjoyed that show. So it's been a really fun week on the network. Please do definitely check out all the regular shows that you do. But in addition, let me give you a few recommendations. On Agla Station Adulthood, Ritasha and Ayushi talk siblings. Really fun episode. I think you'll enjoy that. Nishad Pai Vaidya is on Cyrus, and they discuss cricket and a lot of different things around cricket. I think you'll enjoy that as well. Old friend Parmesh Shahani, he was on Absolutely Right. Definitely do check that out. Tamal Mills was on Edges and Sledges, another episode which I've heard really good things about. I haven't heard it yet. I need to listen to that soon. And guys, Uncle Please Sit, definitely listen to that. They've been killing it. This week they have Abby Phillips, he's a doctor talking about medical misinformation. Last week Paramita Vora was talking about sex education and who needs it. They've been really killing it. Definitely do check that out. And with that, hope to see you again next week.
Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Don Bradman, and now Cyrus Brocha. Okay, probably not in the right company. I mean, Don Bradman is Australian. But it's called Cyrus Says, a wonderful show about everything. Find the show on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts.